Hello Internet, my name's Corrigan, and I'm here to talk to you about setting up a budget for buying a house as a cooperative. We're going over a spreadsheet to show us how to set up a budget for buying a property as a cooperative. We've gone over the development budget, which includes the use of funds, what you have to spend money on to set up a co-op, purchasing the property. And we've also looked at the source of funds, where can you get all that money to purchase a property, both borrowing money and fundraising money. Now we'll look at the operating budget, which takes a look at the first 12 months of operation of the co-op. What's the money coming in, what's going out, and what's the bottom line? Does it work? On this tab of the spreadsheet, we've copied over some of the basic information: number of beds, square footage, and appraised value. We'll be using those numbers to make some rough estimates for the budget at this point. As you investigate a particular property further, you might get more specific information, and you'll continue to refine the budget throughout the process. So first we have a list of rooms and their monthly rents. In this example, we have 15 rooms, and each of them we're going to start off thinking we'll charge $400 per month. It's often convenient, if they're all going to be the same, or if you have some adjustment factors, to link each of these to a base rate. So if I want to change the base rate to 410, all of the room rents update, and you don't have to go through and change each cell individually. Below there we have a total monthly revenue, and that's just adding up each of the room rent incomes. That number then, we multiply by 12 to get the annual income, so 6,000 times 12, 72,000 gross potential rents. We do want to discount that slightly because there may be vacancies between when people move in and move out. People might move unexpectedly, or someone might just not pay rent for a little while and then leave, and that amount might not be collected. So we're going to include all of that under vacancy allowance. Typically we use 5% of the gross income as an estimate for that. That number might be higher or lower depending on vacancy rates in your area and the experience of the co-op, and it might be higher or lower depending on what safety margin your lender wants to see. So subtracting out the vacancy allowance, that gives us a net rental revenue of $68,400. There might be other sources of income for the co-op, in particular food and supplies for shared food in the co-op if there's a group meal plan. Utilities might be billed out separately from people's rent. For the sake of this example, we'll include those in the rent, and we'll say each person pays $150 a month for other food and supplies. So that gives the total effective income, $95,400, and that's per year. Now looking at the expenses section, we want to include all of the utilities that are coming into the building. Again, this might balance out with a utility income. You could estimate that based on your estimated expenses. You might have something where you split it up so that it's going to exactly cancel out, but it should all be listed. Water and or sewage, depending how that's billed by your municipality. Electricity, gas, heat, or how, if you're in a climate that requires heat, and phone or internet or data television service, and food and household supplies. And here's where I just put $27,000 here to match the amount coming in for income above. How do you get these numbers? Well, you can look at a bill from a local utility for an apartment or a house and scale that up by how many people or how many square feet the new property will be. Going off of kind of rough national averages, electricity and gas, heat would be about $200 per person per year. That's obviously going to vary a lot depending if you're in a hotter or colder climate, air conditioning using more electricity, gas more for heat. Also depending on the type of heat source. You might have electricity for heat, you might have a wood stove, you might burn kerosene. So you'll want to take a look at what options, what things look like in your neck of the woods. Let's look at this next section of expenses. Garden and grounds. It's usually a fairly small amount, but it's good to set aside something for setting up gardens, taking care of tree and lawn and snow removal in the area. Next is the amount for maintenance, and generally by maintenance we mean upkeep, routine upkeep of the property, fixing things that are broken, and that sort of thing. Generally things that are costing less than $1,000. You'll want to set a policy specifically about which expenses you capitalize and which are just expensed. Expensed means maintenance, capital means this capital improvement line, which we'll get to next. For your accounting purposes and filing taxes, there is an important difference between that. Also, when you do the bookkeeping and want to show a balance sheet, there's a difference between that. But at this stage in the game, we're not going to be showing a balance sheet, so these both show up as cash outlays. Ways to estimate that. If you want to start with a very rough figure, you might go with $1 per square foot of the building, which would give us $5,000. You might be able to get a better estimate by looking at properties of a similar age and size, similar level of finishes that you're trying to maintain, and also what skills are in the co-op, how much work can be done by members versus needing to be contracted out. So similar to maintenance, capital improvements, this is generally things that are going to be more than $1,000, where you're going to be replacing a major system that you expect to last for 5, 10, 20 years. So replacing a hot water heater, replacing the roof, replacing windows, retiling, redoing drywall in an area, upgrading electrical systems. Again, a very rough estimate here. You might do $1.50 per square foot. This can range fairly widely depending on the costs in your area and how high-end or budget of equipment and services you're trying to maintain the building to. Next set here is what I would call the the overhead costs, these next 7 lines here. Property tax, generally paid annually to a county. Property tax is easy to look up. Most counties have a website that let you look up the property tax value for any current property, even if you don't own it, and you can see what they've charged in the past. Insurance, you can often ask an insurance agent to give you some kind of estimate of insurance for a property. As a rough guess here, we're looking at 1% of property value for insurance, maybe 1.5% of property value for the taxes. But again, these both vary quite a bit. Different localities will charge much higher, lower property taxes. Also, your insurance will vary a lot depending on what types of hazards there are. Is it in a floodplain? Are there earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, forest fire? All of that sort of thing will vary a lot from region to region. Next, we have a line here for co-op management services. I left it blank because this can vary a lot depending on the background of the co-op and the setup, but it's good to remember that you will need to do some certain regular activities like bookkeeping, reporting to lenders, reporting to government agencies, various corporate hygiene tasks like filing taxes, filing annual reports, and some amount of capital planning and budgeting for the co-op. A lot of small co-ops are able to take on all these tasks with their own members over time. Some co-ops will hire out parts of this, like the bookkeeping. There's also different arrangements where multiple co-ops band together to consolidate some of these services while maintaining separate ownership of their properties. There's a lot of options there, and if you're interested in exploring that, please get in touch with NASCO and we can look over the different options there. We include a line for education and training. Principle number 5, cooperatives need to continuously educate and train their members, both in what a cooperative is and the value of it, and how to participate in governance, as well as the day-to-day operations, especially in a housing co-op, and especially in a small housing co-op that's not going to have paid staff. We have a line for accounting, which is preparing the annual tax returns. Legal services, you should budget at least as much annually as it costs to complete an eviction, which might include both the court filing fees and an attorney's fee to conduct that. Hopefully you won't need to use it, but it's good to know that if you got into a situation where the co-op needed to evict a member, it would have the money set aside to do that. And an admin and miscellaneous line. So that brings us to total operating expenses, $63,080. And then we have the biggest line here, the debt service. So that is that total from the development tab, $36,085, the sum of all of the loan payments that you have to make in the course of a year. So that gives us a total cash expenditures of $99,165, and here's the bottom line, net income. This is taking your total effective income up here and subtracting your cash expenditures for the year, and this is what your net cash income is for the year. This number should be positive. If it is not, then your co-op is not solvent, and you are losing money each year on a cash basis. So you will eventually run out of cash and not be able to pay your bills. The other at this point is when you start playing with your thing, with the budget, and we can say like, well, do we want to increase rent, or do we want to figure out a way to spend less on one of these expenses, or do we want to figure out a way to borrow less money or pay a lower interest rate? All of these are options, and you can use the spreadsheet to play around with different scenarios. So let's go back over here and did what we did earlier. Let's try increasing the rent to $410 per person per room. We update that. It updates all of the room rents. It updates the monthly revenue. That updates the gross potential rents. It updates the income. We can scroll back down here. Oh, we're still negative, minus 2,000. We're going to need to go a bit higher. Let's go all the way up to 450. Everything updates. We scroll down. Great, now we have a net income that's positive, $4,785. So you'll operate the co-op each year, and there'll be a little bit of cash saved in addition to all that's been set aside for these expenses. Final number that you want to look at and you'll want to talk to lenders about is the debt service coverage ratio. This number is calculated as a ratio of the income that you get at the end of the year versus the debt service. Here we've calculated as 1 plus the ratio of the net income to the debt service. So if your debt service coverage ratio is 1, that means that your net income was 0. So it's giving you a measure of how much you have extra in proportion to the loan payments that you need to make, which is what the bank's interested in. Most banks will require a debt service of 1.25 or higher. Some will do 1.2. So even if you're in the black here, a lender might not lend to you because you don't have enough of a safety margin here. We're at 1.13. Let's see, what can we do to get up even higher? Well, let's raise the rents. Let's just keep going up. $475. How about that? That brings us to 1.25 with a net income of $9,000 a year. So if you're able to set up your budget so that everyone pays $475 a month, and these are the assumptions about expenses, you'll have enough of a surplus that most banks would consider this financially to be something that they'd consider lending to. As we mentioned before, at this point you can also go back to your development budget and examine your assumptions here. Maybe it means you want to buy a cheaper building, or maybe it means you can't do some of those renovations at the beginning. Or maybe you need to find someone with an interest rate that's a little bit lower in order to make it work. This spreadsheet's set up so that you can go in and change those assumptions and then come back and see how does that affect your bottom line